What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Thursday, August 2nd, 2018. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. And we've got a lot to talk about. There's a lot going on today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in the control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments, questions, criticisms, opinions, and so forth and so on. Now, 54 years ago today, the United States government and the corporate media created and spread fake news to launch the Vietnam War. And we're, of course, talking about the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which was a total lie. And it started innocently enough with an inexperienced sonar operator hearing his own ship's propellers and saying, "Oh, we're under attack." And that went up the chain of command, and the captain of the Maddox immediately sent another report. Erroneous, didn't happen. And President Johnson ignored the second report, took the first one in to Congress, got the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. The corporate media said, "Oh, we were attacked, we were attacked, we were attacked." And we were launched into one of America's deadliest wars in history. 60,000 Americans dead by the time it was all over. And not to put too fine a point on it, we lost that one. And you need to understand, the government and the corporate media have had this relationship throughout our history. When the USS Maine exploded in Havana Harbor from a coal bunker fire, as determined by subsequent investigations, the captain, William Sigsbee, said the ship was destroyed by an onboard fire. But the Hearst newspapers said, "Oh, no, it was obvious it was a Spanish mine." And the government said, "Oh, it's obvious it was a Spanish mine," and launched the Spanish-American War. When the Lusitania was sent into an area known to be crawling with U-boats without a military escort and sunk, the government and the corporate media put out the lie that it was an innocent passenger ship, and buried the fact that the Lusitania had actually been smuggling weapons to Great Britain in violation of the United States at the time declared neutrality, which ended shortly thereafter as the United States entered World War I. We know now that Pearl Harbor wasn't a surprise. It wasn't a surprise attack. Roosevelt goaded them into it. So when you see the government and the corporate media out there today saying that Iran is doing this or Russia is doing that, you got to remember your history. These two bodies, demons, whatever you want to call them, have a long history of collusion to take this nation to war after war after war after war. Now, over at NewsBud, Sibel Edmonds is basically reporting that she has information from multiple insider sources about a plan to remove Iran's current government by force. So they're not talking about a full-on invasion of Iran, because that didn't work out all that well in Syria, did it? They're talking about basically going on in with a decapitation strike. And of course, Iran is in turmoil now because of the economic hardship. We'll be talking about that a little bit later in the show. But this is the United States again, trying to overthrow the legitimate government of other nations and put in puppet rulers. It's covert colonialism. The U.S. doesn't go on in and hoist their flag over the conquered territory. They don't need to. They're just there for the money. They're there for the loot and the plunder. That's all they really care about here. Now, Iran's Navy has assembled near the mouth of the Persian Gulf, supposedly for a military exercise, a display of force, near the Strait of Hormuz. Now, the Strait of Hormuz is a choke point from the Persian Gulf into the open sea. And Iran intends to demonstrate that they can, if they need to, shut down this strategically important waterway. Obviously, the United States government is monitoring it very, very closely. and they're saying the exercise is expected to begin in the next 48 hours. Now, it's a situation ripe for a false flag, where a U.S. ship gets sunk and it's blamed on Iran, and we're off to the war. Wouldn't be the first time the U.S. government has willingly sacrificed people and ships to start a war. That's what happened here at Pearl Harbor. All of the modern aircraft carriers and their escorts were way off to the south when the Japanese arrived. What was left here in the harbor was old, outdated ships, some of them going back to World War I. The sister ship of the Arizona, the Utah, had already been taken off of active combat duty and was being used for gunnery training. But they made great sacrificial lambs so that Roosevelt could get up there and talk about the dastardly day of infamy and lead us off to yet another war. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our show here. Now, Israel is threatening to attack Iran if the Red Sea Strait is closed. And basically, it's just another pretext. They're just trying to find something that people will say, yes, yes, it's okay, go ahead and attack Iran. But Netanyahu announced yesterday he's willing to deploy the military if Iran tries to block the Bab al-Mandeb Strait in the Red Sea. Now, the Red Sea Strait is a novel one to threaten Iran over, since it isn't particularly near Iran, and Iran has never threatened it. It's doubly strange because Saudi Arabia closed that very same waterway to oil ships just last week, and now they're traveling north and out the Suez Canal. But it's just Netanyahu out there, provocative rhetoric, bad-mouthing Iran here. Now, there's an interesting little article that came out of the original antiwar.com about how Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban visited Israel last July 19th, where he met Netanyahu and other officials. And Orban's visit would not have required much pause, except the Hungarian leader has been repeatedly branded for his often racist, anti-Semitic remarks. So why all of a sudden is he buddy-buddy with the leaders of the now official Jewish state? And it has to do with Israel's attitude toward the rapidly growing nationalist far-right movements in Europe as a whole. Netanyahu and Zionist leaders are aware of this massive political shift in European politics, and also, let's be honest, here in American politics, and they're working diligently to basically get in on the ground floor in order to hijack it and utilize it for Israel's benefit. Politics does indeed make for strange bedfellows. Noam Chomsky is basically saying the same thing. Israel was the absolute darling of progressive liberal America, but not anymore. It's shifting right. So, Israel has released and deported the activists from the Freedom Flotilla, or they've done some of them, apparently a multi-day process. But they are starting to let these people go on back to their home. Some of them are already being interviewed in the media and basically saying that Israel has no wish that their criminal acts will be seen. Well, that's true of any criminal. I mean, you'd have to be an idiot to commit a criminal act and, like, put it on YouTube, although apparently some people have been that dumb. But the Al Auda, the Norwegian boat, was stopped by the Israeli Navy in international waters. Now they're saying it was only 46 miles off the coast of Gaza. Earlier reports had said 70, but it's still in international waters, which makes Israel's boarding of the boat an act of piracy under international law. So 2 Israeli citizens who were on board the flotilla were almost immediately released on bail. 2 international journalists have been released. So we sort of knew that was what was going to happen. One of the activists came from New Zealand. He has finally arrived back home in Auckland, and he's saying they were tased and beaten on board the ship. And all the ship was doing was carrying medical aid to Gaza, which desperately, desperately needs it in the face of these ongoing shootings of unarmed protesters by IDF snipers. So Israel is now starting to come on out and saying that the reason they took the vessel in international waters was to prevent weapons from being smuggled into Gaza for the terror organization Hamas. Of course, there were no weapons on board the ship. Now, here's where it gets a little interesting. A lot of people are out there parroting Israel's propaganda who don't really know what's going on. It's just fashionable. It's fashionable to be pro-Israel. It's also good for your career, let's be very honest. And apparently there is this South African entrepreneur and former model named Sashi Naidoo. And she had basically copied and pasted anti-Palestinian propaganda on her Instagram account to defend Israel's violent response to the Great Return March protests in the Gaza Strip. That triggered a massive backlash. So Naidoo deleted the post, issued an apology, and announced her intention to educate herself about the reality of the Israeli occupation by going on a self-funded educational tour of the occupied Palestinian territories. Israel stopped her at the border and declared she is banned from entering Israel for the next 10 years. See what happens when you open your eyes and try and see things for yourself? Bad things will happen. Now, former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee was over in Israel speechifying, trying to build his foreign policy credentials. I think he may toss his hat into the ring in 2020. And the settlers are saying thousands more homes are needed in the West Bank. And Mike Huckabee said he's in favor. He's in favor of more of these illegal settlements being built in the West Bank. And he had this podium with a red and white sign which read, "Build Israel Great Again," which sort of puts a little bit of a damper on the Make America Great Again, which was also in red and white. Let's take a phone call here from Peter in Los Angeles. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, that article that Seymour Hersh wrote about how it used to be fashionable, to be for a liberal Jew to be pro-Israel, and now it's not. And the reason why is basically it's the alternative media. This information. Nothing has changed with Israel. The law changed. They made it. They etched it into stone that the Palestinians and the Gazans and the West Bank people and the non-Jew citizens of Israel are second-class Untermensch people to be stolen from and abused whenever possible. But they've been abusing people back during the Intifada in the 80s when they broke 20,000 Palestinians' bones. They were peacefully, protesting, or maybe even just throwing a rock, stone throwing. Well, they've been doing the Rachel Corrie thing and running over people, and they've been bulldozing homes, and they've been massacring people, in the wars all over. They knew, the liberal Jews knew about the liberty. They knew about how Obama sold them for all the intercepts and on all Americans.
Yeah.
They've known that all along. It's there to look at. It's just now. You're right. It's unfashionable. People are pointing out that they're Nazis. People are pointing out just how licentious, how rapacious, how brutal, and how two-faced that they are. And now they're finding it hard to sustain.
Well, Israel has always tried to defend its actions by hiding behind the Holocaust. Remember, there was a former member of the Knesset was on Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman, who came on out and simply admitted, it's a trick. Anytime somebody is trying to criticize the actions of the government of Israel, they'll scream Holocaust at them. and
anti-Semitism.
And anti-Semitism. But they've burned them both out. I mean, back when Israel was being founded, World War II was a fresh memory for a lot of people. Today, it's ancient history. It all happened before I was even born, and I turned 66 the end of this month. And the same thing with anti-Semitism. They've hurled it in so many directions, people just don't care anymore.
Well, I mean, you look at the way that they treat their own little empires here, right? Hollywood, with all these people doing all the rapes and everything else. It's just, they look upon us to be preyed on. That's just part of the culture. I'm sorry, it's part of the culture.
It's part of the religion. I learned that from my first wife.
Yeah, I mean, it's and now that it's becoming known that, you know, that, and everybody who cares to know will know that everybody in the world knows, except for the Marshall Islanders and the idiotic people in the United States and the people who vote against in the UN. Everybody else, there's 100,000 people in the Marshall Islands, by the way. That's it. Everybody else votes against them except us. Everybody knows, you know, that they're the emperor wearing no clothes, that they control the media. Nothing gets said, nothing gets criticized in the mainstream, quote, corporate media. But now there's enough light on it that they just can't keep up their liberal facade.
Nope. You know, the tide is definitely turning, and that's why all of a sudden they're on the warpath against the independent media. This South African former model, I think, is a good illustration of somebody whose worldview about what was going on with Israel and Palestine came off the corporate media, and she didn't understand the degree of her own ignorance. And then when she went to try and find out for herself, Israel bans her from entering their country for 10 years. Which shows you just how afraid they are that people are going to stop listening to the corporate media propaganda, and they're going to stop, you know, watching all these old movies on cable TV about World War II and Hitler and the Nazis, and they're going to start saying, I want to see what's going on over there on that fence between Gaza and Israel. Because you're right, Israel's treatment of the Palestinians has been brutal, going all the way back to when Israel carved itself out of Palestine.
It's completely unchanged, Mike, and the only difference is now that they can't, the Jewish-controlled, mainly, media can't keep it out now. And so now they're forced to deal with just the ugly face of who they really are. So
yeah, I mean, the corporate media is losing audience. The independent media, I mean, there's so many of us now. When I started doing this all the way back in 1994, you could count the number of people who were out on the internet doing this on the fingers of one hand. And today there's hundreds and hundreds of independent journalists out there on the web. And, you know, it really is a major phenomenon that has been happening. And of course, Israel's out there trying to ramrod through this idea that criticism of the government of Israel's actions represents hatred of the Jewish people and therefore can legally be suppressed, which is ridiculous. That's like saying that the only reason anybody ever complained about the Nazis is they hate the German people.
And Mike, you know what? They're willing, in order to not look unfashionable, in order to not have to answer for the horribly ugly things that they're doing all the time. They're trying to, they are willing, the American Jewish community, which is saying nothing about all these things where they're trying to make criticism of Israel in the United States, 26 states so far, a whole lot of campuses all over the place.
Yes.
They're trying to restrict and are willing to restrict the freedom of speech, First Amendment rights of 330 million Americans in order so they don't have to answer uncomfortable questions about the Nazis in Israel and how they've been covering it up.
Well, you're absolutely right about that. But there are American Jews who are starting to speak out. Even though it's religiously prohibited, there are American Jews who are starting to speak out. And there are Jews in Israel, like Steve Amsel. Anyway, got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials. Got another caller waiting on the line, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And once again, we're standing in front of you with our little hat out there, looking for a little bit of spare change to help keep Republic Broadcasting and WhatReallyHappened.com going. So if you can help out, and we really do need it, and there's no such thing as too small a donation. You know, don't be shy. Every little tiny bit will help. The postal address to send a check, money order, or if you prefer anonymity, cash, is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Road, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number to call in a credit or debit card donation or to pledge to be a recurring subscriber is 800-724-2719, extension 1 during business hours, extension 3 at all other times. So the network thanks you, I thank you, and it's really important that at this time in our nation's history that the independent media is supported, because there literally is a war going on between the liars and the truth tellers. All right, we're going to go back to the phones here. Dustin in New Jersey, welcome back to the show, and what is on your mind today?
I wanted to talk about some other subjects, but Mike, when it comes to Israel, they made a big mistake passing that law, which gives the Jews officially their home, their home country. That's very draconian law that just alienate the people like that support them around the world, like the bought off politicians. But like it really created a lot of instability inside their country because a lot of Jews don't like this law.
That's absolutely right. And of course, it also upset the Druze, who are not considered Muslims, but they're relegated to second-class status. And they serve in the IDF. They serve within the government itself. The law was not really well thought through. And it basically proclaimed to the world that Israel is in fact an apartheid nation. And it was a bad thing to do. The optics on it were bad. The optics were bad on moving the embassy. The optics were certainly bad on that Bloody Monday massacre. But it seems like Netanyahu simply feels that he is a deity now, and he can just do whatever he wants. And he's living up to the behavior of the Old Testament God, who was really not very, very nice, But I guess having a kid mellowed him out because the God of the New Testament is a lot nicer.
Isn't it amazing, though? God's chosen one, even though supposedly, but like Netanyahu is like one of the most corrupt politicians in the world. But God's chosen one, but he's corrupt. Yeah, it's like it just doesn't jive. I mean, it's just bull. I mean, my God. I mean, are there people that stupid?
Yeah, can't God choose somebody better, more moral, more ethical, a better example of humanity?
I thought Jesus kicked the money junkies out of the temple. I don't think he would be like happy with Netanyahu. Like right there, that just tells you a lot of the evangelicals are suckers. It's sad. It's like so weak-minded people. Like Jesus kicked the money junkies out of the temple. He ain't gonna like somebody who's like a corrupt politician. Netanyahu's got a lot of baggage, and everybody knows that because he's been involved in a lot. Wasn't he involved in selling the ignition switches to Pakistan? Like he was like a furniture company front or something. I mean, there's a lot of shady crap that is behind him.
The Krytron switches, I think, which are used for nuclear warhead detonation.
But I guess since he's God's chosen one, we'll forget about that one.
Yes, you're being an anti-Semite again. You hate the Jews. Holocaust, Holocaust, Holocaust. Hitler, Hitler, Hitler. Nazis, Nazis, Nazis.
Hey, Mike. Now we know who's the boss when it comes to Alyssa Milano. It's the deep state and Bob Mueller. It's not Tony Danza, right? Because she's a shill for the deep state. She says to go out in the streets if he fires Mueller. 90% of the people in the country don't know what a Mueller is. And that Ashton Kutcher guy holding up a CIA cup on his Twitter account or something. Do these people not remember the Iraq War? Where were they? Great intelligence agencies with the fraudulent intelligence. I mean, it boggles my mind how ignorant these people are. All of them. They're all like either shills or they're just so stupid they don't have any critical thinking skills. It's pretty sad.
That's because our schools aren't teaching critical thinking schools. Our modern state-operated schools are basically teaching conformity, obedience to authority, and indoctrinating them with the liberal agenda, global warming, and it's okay for boys to use the girls' room and all that kind of stuff. They're pointedly not being taught to think critically, to think analytically, or to think logically. That's a very, very dangerous thing to have in a country under the current leadership that we've got. They want them dumbed down, and they've succeeded.
They have the schools. I'm not a big fan of homeschooling because then they can teach what they, some of the parents are Looney Tunes. They can teach their kids what they've been indoctrinated with, So it's like you're damned if you do, if you're damned if you don't, right? When it comes to, All
right, well, listen, Dustin, we're at another commercial break here. So thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And there's a story flitting around on Twitter right now about a guy named Boyd who was caught with a gun in his car. Well, basically, he was planning on attacking the president and the president's family. And he was thwarted by the police. Apparently, he talked to the wrong person who went to the police, and he's looking at 4 counts of making terroristic threats to murder Trump. It's also a federal felony to do that. But I'm wondering why this didn't get coverage in the corporate media. Are they so against Trump that they don't want to have anybody feel any sympathy for him? I mean, you've got all these celebrities and big shots talking about assassinating him, and here it looks like this guy really intended to do it. And fortunately, he was stopped. But it doesn't seem to be getting a lot of coverage here. And as a matter of fact, I'm just putting up a link to a local TV station's video report of the story. So after that clears the cache in about 5 minutes, you should be able to see that. All right, let's go back to the phones here. Philip in Puerto Rico, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. My name is Philip Hayden. I live in the town of Kaonohi, Puerto Rico, actually. And since 1983, I've been in the know of what's happening because I like to investigate all these things. Well, the thing is that 7 years ago, I was working in the Statue of Liberty, living in New Jersey. And I met this Mason and while having breakfast, and I started conversating with him about these subjects. And looks like he doesn't like Christians and the know of these things. So he told me, hey, let me show you something here just down the block. So I went down the block, and it was a Catholic church, and there was a camera right in front of the church. So I thought, well, this guy, he wants to investigate me. I have nothing to hide. So I just went and looked into the camera, and it wasn't to investigate me. It was to just call for some thugs and hug me down, So when they were encircling me in the Statue of Liberty, that I saw that I wasn't, going to be able to get away. I just left my new car and all my belongings, my books, everything, and I came over here to Puerto Rico. And the thing is that this is something international, so they call the Masons here from my town.
Hang on. I need you to calm down a little bit. First of all, I would not be surprised to see a TV camera in front of a church. We have them in front of clearest churches because of the problems we've had with the homeless and vandalism and everything. Mm-hmm. I have to be very honest and say I think maybe you let your imagination get the better of you. The way you describe the story, it just seems like...
They got thugs in front of my house right now. They got thugs in front of my house right now. I can't leave my house. I've been in my house for 3 weeks now.
Well, then you should be calling the local... You should be calling the local police and not a talk radio show. Because there's absolutely nothing that I can do from all the way out here in Hawaii.
Well, I heard that if I make it public, that maybe they backed off, so that's why I called you.
Well, you've made it public, and, whoever's listening to this show, but I would say you might also want to go out on social media and make it public that way and hope it goes viral. So,
I've been trying to call a local radio here in Puerto Rico, but I can't get a hold of no, they don't answer that. But anyway, I appreciate it. I thank you, Mike.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the phone call, and we're going to let you go, and we're going to get back to the news here. We're talking about Israel and Gaza and what's going on there. And apparently, Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman has issued a new order banning the entry of fuel and gas into Gaza Strip through the Kerem Shalom crossing from this morning. And he's basically saying that he's doing it to prevent Palestinians from flying kites and balloons that are on fire near the border fence. Now, again, this represents a form of collective punishment, which is illegal under international law. And for all we know, the people, at least some of the people more recently flying those balloons and kites, may well have been agent provocateurs. But at this point, it's very obvious. You know, Israel is putting the squeeze on Gaza. They want them to go away. They want that land back. Now, over in occupied East Jerusalem, senior Israeli officials were in attendance when a new settler-run heritage center was opened in the heart of Silwan, which is a Palestinian neighborhood. And the inauguration of the center was also attended by former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee. So, yeah, he's acting like somebody who's going to throw his hat in the ring in 2020. And the Israeli government has allocated $1.2 million to develop the site to honor the Yemenite Jews who lived there in the 19th century. So they're basically trying to craft a history of how Jews have been there and the Palestinians have not. We've talked about that before. Even in my article, you know, the maps tell the true story. The Palestinians, of course, are saying the center is part of a larger effort by Jewish settlers and their allies in the government to consolidate control of Arab neighborhoods in the city. Now, all Israeli settlements in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, are illegal under international law. So they are very lawless over there in the government of Israel here. All right, we're going to go back to the phones. Layla in Canada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, aloha, Mike. I apologize. In the past, I've been hiding my identity and calling myself Vivian. In truth, I'm a Palestinian, and I have been fearful of repercussions from both the illegal aliens that are coming over as well as some of the radical Muslims. I'm also afraid of Israel and its agents that very often are disguised as Arabs when they are actually Mizrahi Jews.
Yes.
What is going on in Gaza now is really no surprise, and it is time that the world, if it has any kind of a human conscience and any sense of self-preservation, takes decisive action, because it has spun out of control. The egomaniacs that call themselves the people of the Bible are not. They are atheist, brutal, Zionist, politically motivated, and motivated by greed as well as the hunger for power. They are murderers, they are assassins, and I hate to say this because my parents used to be very good friends with the Jews that had been living in Palestine, as well as even some of the Ashkenazim who came over. They also were very good friends with a lot of the Muslims. Now, the thing that really bothers me is that the world is turning a blind eye to that and distracting us. It's not with bread and circuses, but they're distracting us with freak shows. A lot of these people who are Muslims in Europe committing a lot of the crimes may indeed be Muslim. I don't know. They may be from the Middle East, or they may indeed be programmed by the Mossad, or what's the other one?
Shin Bet.
Shin Bet, yes. They've been doing that for ages. I worked for the Institute for Palestine Studies in Beirut in 1971, where the PFLP tried to recruit me, and then the CIA tried to recruit me. They said, we know the PFLP is trying to recruit you. We want you to join and then report back to us. What they did not know was that I had already seen all the buildings in Beirut that had bombed out windows because the agents for both the CIA and the Mossad had been sending letter bombs to all the people who are considered intellectuals among the Palestinians who might become leaders that could organize a peaceful or an effective resistance to the Zionist strategy in the entire Middle East. It has always been known amongst the Palestinians once they realized that these were European Ashkenazim Zionists with a few Mizrahi Jews integrated into their genetics to give them the appearance of being the people of ancient Judah. Even one example would be the culinary food of the Ashkenazi Jews. They spoke Yiddish. Their food was gefilte fish and a number of other things. They never had tabbouleh, or what they have turned into pita bread, which used to be known as khubz Arabi, and all these other things. That is always an indication. People usually, no matter where they move, retain their culinary traditions.
Yes.
What they have also created is a new form of Judaism, not simply the political Zionism, but they also in the 1800s created and formalized the three major Jewish sects: the Orthodox, the Conservative, and the Reform. Those are not the ones that were practiced in ancient Judah. In fact, those who did practice what was considered monotheism in ancient Judah were actually still practicing pantheism. And that is why among the commandments, the first one is, I am whatever, however, whichever translation one uses, I am a jealous God, thou shalt have no other gods before me. In other words, there was a recognition. People were still worshiping the gods of various pantheons. Yes. But this new God who declared, first of all, he's declared the one and only God, and then that one and only God declares the Jews of that the chosen people. Now, the so-called elders, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, was supposedly a fraud. It is not. It was clearly someone who betrayed them and revealed the truth. Because if anyone reads the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, every single one of those strategies has been fulfilled. And if it hasn't been completed, it is certainly well on the way. With regard to what Trump is doing, it is abominable. Clearly, the man has been bankrupt, which is why he never revealed his tax statements. And so he is definitely owned and operated by the Zionist alliances and all their spin-off groups. Now, to the Jews who might be listening, if you have any belief, any spiritual belief, you must oppose Netanyahu and all the evil that has gone before him. Lieberman, the Russian, the product of Soviet Bolshevik Zionism, is now leading and organizing the murder of the descendants of the rightful inhabitants. What my cousins told me, those who remain but have since fled in Bethlehem, told me that every time we were chased away or defeated by one of the conquering empires, we always took shelter, and then we'd come back and reclaim our homeland. Those are the people of the Bible. They have been scattered around the world and vilified. When I worked in the industry and TV news, I was always restricted. And every time I would, for example, a simple thing, when I came back from doing a series, I worked for the ABC affiliate in New Orleans, the ABC TV affiliate, and they sent me off to do a Christmas in Bethlehem series because it would bring up the ratings, since New Orleans then was approximately 95% Catholic. So when I went there, I remember one of the lines that I said was, there were so few pilgrims that the soldiers with their snipers point with their rifles pointed down into Manger Square, outnumbered the pilgrims. Then there was a call from somebody in the Jewish community to the general manager that was anti-Semitic. Wherever I went, I was followed, because I always took pride in my heritage of being someone born in Bethlehem of ancient Palestinian ancestry. Mm-hmm. So what is going on now, while there are a diversity of ethnic groups within the original Palestinian culture, they are now clearly identifiable as one nation, one ethnic group. And the Arabs who have betrayed them are monstrous, because this issue, they have been kept as a football, which the Israelis enjoyed bragging about. They have been kept as a football in order to keep one Arab nation from, keeping the others off center, and they can have all their Arab League meetings, and they can do whatever they want. But the point is, we are sitting back while we have been tormented with the narrative of the Holocaust, which I believe was only the anti-Zionist rich Jews so that their wealth could be stolen by the Zionists, and was handed over by the Nazis to the Zionists. Hitler was definitely not, if he was anti-Semitic, it was anti-Arab. And so
okay,
that whole narrative of the Holocaust.
Leila, I hate to cut you off. We're coming up on a commercial break, and I want to back up to something that you were saying about that maybe some of these Muslims in Europe who are committing these horrible acts, which are upsetting the Europeans, understandably, might not be real Muslims. It's my understanding that the IDF actually has a unit of soldiers who are recruited because they look like they're Palestinian or Muslim, and then they are trained as infiltrators. They're given language skills. They're given, basically they're made to look like they are Muslims and Palestinians, and then they're sent out to do all kinds of mischief. We know because...
Right.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Quite right, because that was the intent of recruiting me. First of all, the PFLP wanted me because they said, you don't look like an Arab and you have a Canadian passport. Then what stunned me was when I was at a dinner party about a week later, I was approached by a man that we already knew amongst us. The secret was, watch out, this guy's CIA.
Mm-hmm.
And sure enough, he was there with another man that was the head of a boys' prep school. I thought he was British intelligence, although I couldn't place his accent. Ironically, it was only 20 years later when I found out from my husband, who apparently had initially been asked to spy on me when I came back from Israel, because I'd been in Lebanon 2 years later, but then he ended up marrying me, probably for my protection. But he told me that man was actually South African and had been and was working for Mossad. I didn't even know this. I never even told my husband about that. But that is how long. And they had placed the CIA on the behest, on the orders of Mossad, had placed FBI agents using the Michigan State Police to find people to keep track of the Arab community, the Muslim Christian Arab community in Michigan and Windsor, Ontario, and southwestern Ontario. It's only later that the Middle Eastern community has grown so large in other cities, large enough that they are now being led by militant Muslims who are in fact creating hostility here in Canada against
and they may
Muslims.
be agents provocateurs. Leila, I hate to cut you off. First of all, I get a lot of emails about you. A lot of the listeners out there are very impressed with your knowledge, and now we know why, because of your background. But I am going to have to let you go because we do have to take a commercial break, and I have to get back to the news. But thank you for the call. We will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Now, over in Great Britain, conservative counselor Brian Gordon filed a motion in Barnet Council Tuesday of this week in an attempt to outlaw the global movement to aid Palestinians in their campaign to end Israeli occupation, basically the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement. And the motion includes the controversial International Holocaust Remember Alliance definition of anti-Semitism to support its claim that BDS is anti-Semitic. And of course, that's the claim that criticism of Israel's government is rooted in anti-Semitism and hatred of the Jews, because we all know the government of Israel doesn't actually do anything that would deserve criticism unless people hated them. However, others have basically questioned whether that motion would even be legal under British law. But it is, again, absurd to say, for Israel to say, that criticism of Israel's government, the actions of Israel's government, is rooted in hatred of the Jews. Is like saying that the only reason people complained about the Nazis is they hate Germans. That's just how silly it is. And yet Israel keeps getting away with all of this nonsense. And they're trying to get that passed here in the United States. They're trying to get that definition accepted. And it's completely ridiculous. And we do need to push back on it. And so it's a valid question to ask. Did people, complain about the Nazis only because they hated Germans? Now, Adidas is no longer supporting no longer sponsoring the Israel Football Association. And last March, 130 Palestinian clubs urged Adidas to end its sponsorship of Israeli football over its inclusion of 6 teams based in the illegal Israeli settlements. And Adidas basically decided, yeah, we don't want to be part of that anymore. Now, David Rothkopf is out there saying American Jews now have a duty to oppose Israel. This gets back to the comment I made to the caller about how American Jews are starting to speak out and they're starting to push back. And basically, David said, for American Jews, we have gone from a duty to support Israel to a duty to question Israel to a duty to oppose Israel. This law did that. He's referring to the nation-state law, because it broadcasts to the world, Israel is an apartheid state, and that is inappropriate in the modern world. Now, this David Rothkopf is a Carnegie Endowment scholar. He's a former editor of Foreign Policy, and apparently was out there on Twitter with Jerusalem journalists Gershom Gorenberg and Noga Tomopolsky, who are basically blaming Netanyahu for the law. So even within Israel, even within Israel's media, they're saying it's a bad idea. Here's where the Jewish people outside of Israel have a valid concern. Israel likes to blur the line between Israel and all the world's Jews. And that means that when Israel commits an atrocity, it places all the world's Jewish people at risk of retaliation, even if they haven't done anything at all, and that is absolutely wrong. All right, we're going to take a break. Back with hour number 2 after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Now, interestingly enough, Israel's defense minister, Avigdor Lieberman, has stated that he believes the Syrian front will be more quiet with the restoration of the Assad administration's control. It looks like Israel just acknowledged that the U.S. has lost this war. And they're not the only ones. The Arabic language Al-Akbar newspaper over in Lebanon is reporting that the U.S. is preparing to withdraw from Syria. Now, the other day we were reporting on a drawdown in Afghanistan, and it may be that somebody inside the Pentagon took a look at the numbers and said, even with all those huge, huge amounts of money coming in from the American taxpayer, they're spending too much. They're stretched too thin. And they may start pulling on back, because right now it would be very reckless for them to go on any more military misadventures with logistics as they currently are. Now, Russia has announced yet another Iran pullback plan in Syria. It's basically, they were saying the deal would have all Iranian forces at least 85 kilometers from the Golan Heights. This is similar to the offer they had a week ago for a 100-kilometer buffer, and Israel has rejected both. They want all Iranian forces to be removed wholly from Syria. Now, Israel counts all the Shiite forces as Iranian. That's where they come up with the big number that they have, even though both Iran and Syria are saying that the actual number of Iranians in the country is very small, and they're in an advisory capacity. So, over in Yemen, apparently the coalition has bombed a hospital, and basically they dozens of victims. They bombed a hospital. And the bombing caught an ambulance as it was entering the gates of the hospital. It was being shown on TV with bodies covered with blankets. Basically, the world is really turning a blind eye to what's going on in Yemen. There are 1.8 million acutely malnourished children under age 5 in Yemen right now. And Yemen's health ministry is completely depleted. They're totally dependent on outside humanitarian care, which Saudi Arabia is trying to cut off by taking the port of Hodeida. And the U.S. is fully on board with this. And the corporate media isn't reporting a word of this. Now, there is a NATO-United States war game getting ready to crank on up in the Russian Georgia, or the European Georgia. And the president couldn't resist digging at Russia, saying that Russia basically is illegally occupying 20% of our country. Now, what he's referring to, of course, is that Russia and Georgia fought a war in August of 2008 over the breakaway Georgian region of South Ossetia. And Moscow still has troops stationed there, and to support another breakaway region, Abkhazia. Now, Russia has recognized both regions as independent states, which is what they wanted to be. Russia didn't come on in and take them. It's the Crimea lie all over again. Ossetia and Abkhazia broke away. Saakashvili tried to militarily invade. Russia came to their assistance. Now, Henry Kissinger is out pushing a plan to get Russia to help the U.S. against China. And a lot of people are thinking that Kissinger may be a little bit past his prime, because Russia and China right now are very close together. They're certainly much closer to each other than either country is close to the United States. And it would take a tremendous amount of effort to split them apart right now, unless Kissinger is thinking that the Russian government is going to be brought down and replaced with the U.S. puppet, which would be a completely different story. All right, D. Apparently, there's a very horrific video, and I watched it, and I don't recommend that you do. But it basically documents how U.S.-backed military basically took women and children, walked them out of their village, blindfolded them, and just gunned them down. I didn't even know that the U.S. was messing around in Cameroon, to be very honest. Okay. Story over at CNET. Trump's Space Force is real, and these are the details. Now, it hasn't officially been funded by Congress, but the Pentagon is moving ahead. They've already started setting up a command structure and a procurement division, and everyone is expecting this new 6th military branch will be materializing very, very quickly. And again, I think, first of all, it's going to cost a lot of money. It's a revitalization of Reagan's Star Wars, and look how much money that cost. That whole Star Wars program is one of the things that took us from being one of the world's largest creditor nations to one of the world's largest debtor nations in the 12 years of Reagan-Bush. And it really didn't produce much of anything that was all that useful for all that money. But then wasteful spending, that's the hallmark of the military-industrial complex. Again, going on back to the movie, The Pentagon Wars, it opens with this hearing in Congress, and the character being played by Kelsey Grammer, is out there saying, we won the Cold War against Russia because we were willing to shovel the money into the flames faster than they were. And it's funny because, in a way, we understand it's true. The Pentagon's attitude is money will win the war. Well, not if you waste it, which they are really good at doing. Now, something else that should have been thought about before we started making stink face at Russia is that U.S. military bases in Europe, like Europe itself, are dependent on Russian energy. And members of Congress are now calling on the Department of Defense to cut reliance on Russian energy and to introduce sanctions against the Nord Stream 2 project. Oh, yes, more sanctions. A sanction here, a sanction there, everywhere, sanction. So it looks like now you will be paying to build power plants on all the military bases all over Europe. Meanwhile, the Army is still having trouble recruiting people, and they're starting to pay really heavy recruitment bonuses. They've poured an extra $200 million into the bonus plan, and they're issuing more waivers for past drug use or bad conduct by recruits. See, if you go to sign up for the military and you've got like a marijuana conviction on your record, you are not getting in. Well, now you can. And the Army in the past has basically changed the limits for weight. They're basically taking in anybody with a pulse. Anyway, let's talk about domestic politics here. Hawaii's Senator Hirono is still out there attacking Donald Trump and saying Giuliani are liars, and basically is still pushing the idea that if the Democrats can get control of the Congress this November, if they steal it, which looks like what they're going to have to do, that they're going to impeach Donald Trump. And that, of course, will put Mike Pence into the Oval Office, which I can't imagine the Democrats see as all that much of an improvement. But you have to have a high crime or misdemeanor, a provable crime, to remove a president. And they don't have one. All they have are allegations. All they have are accusations. They have a totally bogus, made up from thin air dossier from a foreigner, British spy Christopher Steele. You can't impeach him just because you don't like him. It doesn't work that way. Now, they had Richard Nixon on using the IRS against his enemies. They had Richard Nixon for flat-out obstruction of justice. It was all documented. They had the proof. And that's why Nixon resigned. And he resigned rather than face an impeachment trial, because the last thing anybody wanted was for somebody in Congress to ask Richard Nixon, why did you bother bugging, the Watergate, the Democratic campaign headquarters in the Watergate, when your reelection was, a study in foregone conclusions? Because the answer to that question could never be allowed out. The Democrats had gotten copies of the photos of the 3 tramps arrested in Dealey Plaza in Dallas, Texas, November 22nd, 1963, and identified 2 of them as Nixon henchmen. Now, Tucker Carlson is out there, and he's doing a whole bunch of real good work out there. I'm really starting to admire him. And he did a segment recently documenting on how the FBI is tied in to the Southern Poverty Law Center, which is not about poverty. It's not even about the law. Their primary function is to basically present as an impartial, unbiased institution that then goes on out and smears anybody who disagrees with the official agenda as a white nationalist or a racist or an anti-Semite. Even my website is on their do not read list here. So, now, as you know, the press conferences in the White House have been getting a little cantankerous, and it resulted in the removal of one CNN reporter for behaving rudely, for shouting at Donald Trump at inappropriate times, shouting questions at inappropriate times. And the corporate media are out there saying it's First Amendment. We've got press freedom and the right to know and unimpeded information. But, where was the same concern when Democrats under Obama were using the Espionage Act to jail whistleblowers and prosecute journalists? Excuse me? Why was there no outrage on the eve of the Ecuadorian government turning over Julian Assange to be prosecuted by Western intelligence for the crime of publishing accounts of their nefarious actions? They're very selective in their outrage. It's okay when other journalists are being shut down, silenced, and punished. You're just not allowed to do it to us. We're the corporate media. We're above reproach. We're beyond criticism here. No, they aren't. Tucker Carlson has also called for the entire unredacted FISA memo to be read out on the floor of the House of Representatives. He wants to see what's underneath all that black ink. So do I. So do a lot of people. Now, the word has come on out that the redacted portions are basically all about protecting the reputation of the FBI. All right, let's take a phone call. Pete in Florida, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Trump is kind of like on my mind. I was out in Nevada in the 1990s, and, he couldn't get a gaming license to own a casino out there because he had too many organized crime connections. And so giving Trump on everything is, whether he's, guilty of anything today or not, but he does have a history of being surrounded by these people.
Well, I think in our society, if you are anybody of prominence, it's only a matter of time before organized crime or the intelligence agencies take an interest in you. And there are some parts of this country where you cannot do business unless you're willing to do business with organized crime, especially out in Nevada.
Not in Nevada. He couldn't get a license in Nevada. They wouldn't let him in.
Well, wherever it was he was doing business, but the point is, I'm saying Donald Trump probably didn't go on out and say, ooh, I want to get hooked up with the mob. It was probably a case of he was working on a project someplace, and, the mob came to him and said, if you work with us, we'll get the unions to back off on this. And we know how the mob operates. They like getting cozy with very rich people because they make money off of them. So I'm really not going to hold that against Donald Trump. My concern is what is he doing inside that Oval Office? And yes, he's been a disappointment, but he still has, 2.5 years to go. And we may see a turnaround. I imagine he's got to be getting very, very angry and frustrated that his own advisors are giving him bad information. And hopefully this issue of impeachment has nothing to do with his Nevada gaming license. He has to have committed a crime that is an impeachable offense, and they don't have anything on him. Anyway, Pete, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Now, let's take a look at the Democratic Socialist Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who was the surprise come-from-behind winner in a recent primary. And she's been described as, just came out of nowhere. And it turns out, no. It turns out she did come from somewhere. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was created inside the walls of the Media Consortium, one of the crown jewels of the George Soros empire, which explains why one of her campaign platforms is totally open borders. So, anyway, now, Hillary has gone Hollywood. Hillary Clinton has teamed up with Steven Spielberg to executive produce a series based on the suffragette days. And she's also out there making cameo roles. She makes a cameo in the season premiere of Madam Secretary, along with Colin Powell and Madeleine Albright. The line between politics and Hollywood is really beginning to blur. But this may signal that Hillary is, in fact, backing off the idea of throwing her hat into the ring in 2020. There was that very bizarre situation where they were signaling that she was considering it, and then all of a sudden there was that other counter article saying Hillary shouldn't for the sake of her family, and all of a sudden we stopped hearing about that. So Hillary is definitely in Hollywood, and of course Steven Spielberg has been one of her ardent supporters all along here. Okay, let's talk about propaganda and disinformation. Basically, as you can see, there's this Russia hysteria everywhere. Anything bad that happens, it's blamed on Russia. Wildfires out west, oh, Russia did it. My washing machine broke down, Russia did it. My car got stolen, Russia did it. Putin still owes me a new car. And basically, the corporate media is echoing the worst excesses of the 1950s, the period known as McCarthyism. We're going right back into that. Anybody who questions the official story is attacked and smeared. They're trying to bring back the Red Scare. And they don't have much to work on because the present-day Russia is nothing at all like the Soviet Union was back in the 1950s. And like that South African model who wanted to go to Palestine to see for herself what's going on, Americans today can pick up a visa and bounce around from St. Petersburg to Vladivostok. It's not a closed society. They're not hiding any secrets. The other day I said that one of the rays of hope, if you will, is that the people trying to build a Cold War version 2.0, the Golden Cut, are playing under the same rules that they used during the first Cold War. And they don't realize how much the world has changed since then. And it really has. All right, we got to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking about the corporate media. And interestingly enough, during one of Trump's recent rallies, the crowd was chanting, CNN sucks, CNN sucks, CNN sucks. And the CNN reporter who was there just wanted to play the victim card and was just whining about, nobody liking him. Well, nobody likes a liar, especially a serial liar. And that is the reality. The corporate media has lost the trust and confidence of the majority of the American people. Now, the New York Times is upset over potential threats against the media. The publisher, A.G. Sulzberger, said he's worried about threats against journalists because of all the negative opinion about the corporate media. But the New York Times has all but ignored more than 500 violent attacks against President Trump and his supporters. They're trying to make themselves the news. Oh, poor us, the corporate media. We're under threat. We must have protection. Now, the New York Times has not made itself any new friends. They just hired Sarah Jeong to the editorial board, and it didn't take long for people on Twitter to find her Twitter page that is just filled with all this racist, white-hating posts. And now she's going to write for the New York Times. They're not even trying to be civil and sane over there at the New York Times anymore. They're out there, pushing that male bash thing here. Let's see. Are there any of these I can read without getting the FCC down on us? Blank, blank, white people marking up the internet with their opinions like dogs pissing on fire hydrants. Let's see. Oh, man, it's kind of sick how much joy I get out of being cruel to old white men. White men are BS. And this one is kind of interesting. I just realized why I can't stand watching Breaking Bad or Battlestar Galactica. The premise of both is just white people being miserable. And it was full. Now, she's taken it all down. But, of course, in the age of the internet, it's already out there. It's not coming back. And it is going viral. And the New York Times is facing all this criticism. And they're trying to justify it, saying Sarah Jeong's anti-white racism is perfectly justified because trolls on the internet called her mean names. Now, if Sarah Jeong's comments were aimed at black people, what do you think the reaction would be? Why all of a sudden is it acceptable to be racist against whites? Why is white hatred now being normalized? Over at the BBC, they're being accused of breaching their own code by putting a critic of Julian Assange in charge of a special on Julian Assange. And it's hosted by journalist John Sweeney. who basically, there's no objectivity. They're trying to demonize him ahead of his release by the Ecuadorian embassy here. And of course, once again, we have the intelligence community saying that, yes, Russia's going to interfere with the midterm elections. They're getting ready to interfere with the 2020 presidential election. Well, why don't you reform the election system into something that can't be tampered with? And I got a blueprint for it right up there at my website in the upper left. It's just more Russia bashing. Just insane. Just insane. And by the way, one of the problems we have with this rising culture of violence to solve political dispute, it's being encouraged by people like Maxine Waters. And there's a good example here. Up in Massachusetts, apparently there was a driver stopped at a red light on Route 28 in Barnstable. And the driver behind him began honking the car horn. And when the light changed, the man drove off, and the other driver followed along, honking the horn. So he thought maybe that there was something wrong with the car. And so he pulled over to the side, opened the car door, stepped out in the road, and then the driver of the other car just started screaming at him because on his car was a bumper sticker for Donald Trump. And she said, "You voted for Trump?" The driver said, "Yes." She said, "You're a racist," several other names. And the man began recording this woman on his cell phone. And she drove around his car, stepped on the gas, drove at him, hitting his open car door and damaging the side of the car. Now, because he was recording it on the cell phone, they got the license plate, and she's now under arrest, as she should be. We're going to take another break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to go back to the telephones now to James in Charlotte. Aloha, James. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi, Mike. I'm just wondering if you had heard about or had made any comment about these calls from a number of groups, primarily on the radical left, of forcibly diversifying the state of New Hampshire because it's just too damn white.
Yeah, we did this story where apparently there was an op-ed in the New York Times talking about those poor Hispanics who had moved to New Hampshire and how uncomfortable they felt because they couldn't speak Spanish to anybody around them. Well, English is the language of this country. Okay, and it is ridiculous, and it does show that this integration of cultures is going to be forced, and is part of this larger plan where Soros and the globalists actually think they're going to stir all these different populations and cultures together, and it's going to go off smoothly without a hitch, and we're all going to hug each other and sing Kumbaya. That's not what's happening, though. And, you know, I'm from New Hampshire myself, and
I knew that.
Yeah, and you know, there's something else that people might want to consider before they start getting the buses out to drive more people into New Hampshire who didn't grow up there. It gets very cold there, and this idea of taking people from Central America and moving them into the northern climes, they're going to be very uncomfortable. Because that's not the climate that they grew up in. Same thing with all these Africans being brought to Europe and moved northward. They're not going to do well those first few winters.
No, I don't think it'd take but maybe 1 or 2 winters to get them heading back south.
Yeah, that's actually happened in Europe, where some of these refugees have gotten up there. They've gone through their first winter, and they say, "Oh man, I can't deal with this."
Yeah, well, another thing I happened to see when I was looking up some information that New Hampshire, it has one of the highest employment rates or lowest unemployment rates, and has one of the lowest incarceration rates. I mean, it looks like it's really probably one of the best governed states in the country.
Yeah, And of course, if they start flooding refugees and illegal immigrants, or even
they'll turn it into California.
Yeah, they'll turn it into California, because that's what liberals do. They take something that's working really great, and they say, we can make it better. We'll liberalize it. And of course, the exact opposite happens. But they're convinced they're right. That article that we talked about the other day, condemning liberal smugness. They're just absolutely convinced that in the long run, they'll be proven right, even if what they're doing right now is causing a huge amount of damage. True believers. I believe, I believe.
Okay, well, that's just, we'll have to see what happens. I hope they fail at any kind of forced diversification.
I do too, and I'm not being racist here. It's because, I have fond memories of New Hampshire. I think all of this forced moving people around, for one thing, they're breaking their emotional connection with wherever it is they came from, and that's actually can be quite traumatic. But you're right. I don't want to see New Hampshire turn into California.
Okay, well, thanks for your comment.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go, and let's see. Clear the screen here. Okay, let's talk about the economic news here. All right, the Federal Reserve is getting ready to engage its largest quantitative tightening to date, just as the stock market is starting to run out of steam. And looking at the stocks today, it looked like they were soaring, but it looks like they basically fell back down. And, well, mixed results, what can I tell you? But every time they tighten, they're trying to undo all the quantitative easing because it's put tremendous inflationary pressure on the economy. But that easy, cheap money was what was powering the stock market. And the politicians were using that stock market as a banner, as a flag. How can you say the economy isn't working? Look at the stock market. It's really, this practice goes all the way back to the Clinton years. And basically, a lot of people are very concerned that if they do too large a quantitative tightening in a single move, it could trigger a panic. And a lot of other people are saying they don't know why one hasn't happened yet. The fundamentals just are not there. Now, apparently the U.S. government is now borrowing more money since 2008. At the same time, they're claiming there's a strong economy and record tax collections. That does not add up. If you've got a strong economy and tax revenues are up, then you don't need to be borrowing more money. Of course, a lot of that borrowing is to finance the wars here. Now, Charles Nenner is out there saying gold is about to enter a new bull market. And Charles Nenner is president of the Charles Nenner Research Center. And he used to work at Goldman Sachs, but he made good his escape. And now he's considered one of the world's leading researchers of market cycles. So he's saying gold is going to be starting back up. Now, obviously, if you're using gold, or for that matter, silver, for wealth preservation, you want to buy when it's low. Common sense, buy low, sell high. That's how you make the money. And just hang on to it for the long term. And it looks like, if the stock market starts to go down, despite all the suppression of gold prices, people are going to get out of the stock market. They'll move to precious metals, and that'll force the price up. No other way to put it here. Now, over in Iran, they're working on a solution to the plunge of the rial. And their plan is to create a floating mechanism for pricing the U.S. dollar to help prevent further depreciation of its national currency, which has lost its value by above 14% within only hours on Sunday. The plan would be meant to take the pricing of the hard currency out of the hands of the street dealers into a newly established secondary foreign currency market. In other words, Iran will decide what the dollar is worth relative to the rial rather than the street dealers. In the same effect, it would ban the Central Bank of Iran from dictating its own rates for the dollar and would instead peg the value of the hard currency to the actual trading rates as obtained from current transactions between currency suppliers and buyers in that newly established secondary foreign currency market. So Iran is working to basically mitigate the damage from all this U.S. economic warfare. Now, here's an interesting little story because, you know, a lot of people tend to vote with their feet when taxes get to be so high. And over in Illinois, there was a case where this one family just said, the taxes are too high. It's hit a breaking point, and the Sirwatka family basically decided to move. And they left Illinois. What really makes it interesting is that Sirwatka was the mayor of the town. And he just said, that's it, we're out of here. Car sales are tumbling as automakers slash discounts for the first time in 5 years. Now, as I have been exhorting you to do, watching those car commercials on TV, you can see the tremendous deals they have in terms of leasing costs, the price of the car. And this has been in response to the fact that car sales haven't really been all that good. And so the manufacturers, corporations have been offering these very steep discounts. Now they're having to back off of those discounts because of concern over what the tariffs are going to do to the actual cost of building the car. And this is going to slow down car sales even more. And down here at the bottom of the hill, we have this old drive-in movie theater, 4 screens, 4 whole screens, no waiting. And they used to use it to run a flea market on every weekend, which Claire and I really liked. But now it's being used as an overflow lot by Oahu car dealerships, and it is absolutely full. There's a real, people are not buying cars. People are not leasing cars. They're hanging onto their cars as long as they can. We held on to our Honda for 18 years. We would have held on to it longer if it hadn't been stolen. Now, speaking of cars, Tesla has lost $717 million in the second quarter, breaking its own record from the previous quarter. Tesla is just hemorrhaging money. And investors, understandably, are getting very nervous about this. And questions are starting to be asked about where are the 17,000 Model 3 cars that were produced but haven't been delivered. See, Tesla had to hit that 5,000 a week production goal and basically said, we have made that goal and these cars are outside the factory gate. But concern is being raised that there are a lot of these vehicles that are seen on empty lots and they're guarded and protected. They may be outside the factory gate. They may not be drivable. They may have just been put onto the lot, missing key components until they can get the parts and clean up the supply train. But everybody's starting to ask questions and wondering if maybe the Securities and Exchange Commission shouldn't, get involved in looking into this situation. Very funny movie, Tom Hanks movie, Gung Ho, about a Japanese car company that comes to the United States and sets up a car factory, and they have to meet a production goal to keep going. And at the end, they're rolling out cars that are missing things like engines. No, it wasn't Tom Hanks. It was Michael Keaton. And this, life imitates art. What can I tell you here? Meanwhile, over at Tesla, Elon Musk is saying the market is not ready to give up the dream. I think the market is waking up here. I know the people who want the Tesla aren't ready to give up the dream. And I feel really bad about it. I think electric cars are the wave of the future. And the Teslas I've seen, the Model 1, looked really, really good. So I hope he pulls it off. I really do. I don't want to see another iconic American company bite the dust. There have been so many lately. Adding to all of Elon Musk's other woes, apparently Tesla is being sued by a customer in New Zealand. And apparently the story is that Neil Darwin, who owns an electric bike shop in Raglan, picked up a damaged Tesla 90D as an insurance write-off at an auction in Australia a year ago for $40,000, which is a quarter of the new car price. And before fixing the vehicle, the man got reassurance from Tesla in Sydney that he was entitled to free access to Tesla's supercharger network of high-speed refill stations for life. After that, Darwin invested $60,000 having the car rebuilt, recertified, and approved by Tesla. Then, all of a sudden, he didn't get the access to the supercharger network. And so he's suing Tesla over the lack of support, saying he hates the way Tesla is treating their customers. Anyway. All right, so let's talk about immigration. Apparently over in Philadelphia, they're no longer cooperating with the Immigration and Customs Authority. And it's time to make some Title VIII arrests. You know, that little situation we had there with Mazie Hirono, who's a member of Congress, who was on the committee that oversees immigration, and she didn't understand there actually is a law on the books making illegal immigration illegal. How many other members of Congress are that ignorant of the actual law? How many mayors are ignorant of the actual law? How many governors? Have we been dumbed down so much that these liberals are running around saying open the borders without realizing that they're committing a crime? They're making America more dangerous. They're costing us huge amounts of money, all for their dream of a new world order. Actually, in this case, they need the illegal immigrants to steal the election in November. And what really annoys me is Trump doesn't seem to be doing anything to stop it. If you enforce Title 18, you cut off the financial incentives for these illegals to come here, put crocodiles in the Rio Grande, start throwing some of these sanctuary city mayors in prison, and shut it all down. And then we need a national voter ID law, and we need it in the next month. We need it now. And I don't understand why Trump is not pushing for this, while he still has the GOP Congress. Because every Republican in that Congress has to know that's the reason for the Democrats to flood this country with illegal immigrants is to take away their seats in Congress. You could get a national voter ID law voted through right now. Somebody needs to have the cojones to do it. Now, over in Paris, there was this pro-migrant group that was distributing food for migrants. In Paris 18th District. They've been there for almost 2 years. But the migrants are becoming so violent, they've had to shut down. I mean, here was a group that was trying to help the migrants, and they've had to shut down because of the migrant violence. Talk about ingratitude. Now, over in Germany, they've come up with a different way of handling the migrant situation. They're setting up what they call these transit centers. And the first one has just opened. And the way it works is asylum seekers are taken to the transit centers and they are kept there while their paperwork is processed. They're not allowed to just walk on out into Germany and start doing whatever it is that they want to do. They will be kept at the transit center. And if their asylum request is approved, they enter Germany. And if it's not, they're sent back home. Anyway, we're going to take another break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, over in Great Britain, as they get closer and closer to the deadline for the Brexit, they're basically trying to prepare and plan for a no-deal Brexit scenario. And they're basically doing studies, and authorities are concerned over what's going to happen initially. And they're saying that a lot of stuff is not going to be working. They're concerned about delivery of public services. They're even concerned that there will be social unrest, probably paid for by George Soros here. And they're basically trying to predict the impact of Brexit on social care, border control, and most importantly, access to food products and medicines under the conditions of uncertain Brexit talks, both with Brussels and within the British government itself. Well, I thought, if I recall correctly, that during the campaign, Donald Trump said he would immediately sign a trade deal with Britain after the Brexit. And I have to wonder why we're not hearing anything about that. Okay, now, apparently there is a petition out there in Great Britain to basically bar Steve Bannon from entering the United Kingdom. They've already gotten 10,000 signatures, which now obliges London to issue an official response to the request. And if the number of citizens supporting the document reaches 100,000, then the petition may be taken under consideration for debate in the British Parliament. But apparently the petition, which was started by citizen activist Bruce Johnston, is intended to prevent Bannon from, quote, disseminating messages of hate in the UK. Now, speaking of fakery and so forth and so on, apparently there was a Facebook group that orchestrated real-life pro-DACA anti-Trump protests. And a lot of people signed on to this Facebook group. It turned out that Facebook group was itself a hoax. It was a fake. Its obvious intention was to galvanize people to go on out and scream at Donald Trump over the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. And again, it's the open borders people. They want those borders open. They need those illegal immigrant votes. And I'll tell you, if Congress and Trump don't address these issues right now, they deserve to lose the Congress in November. I'm sorry. They've had a year and a half to look at this and understand what was going on. And all they can do is sit around, take the pills that are delivered to them there in the Capitol building, and who knows. Anyway, we're going to take a break. We'll be right back with hour number 3 after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Okay, up in St. Louis, apparently police pulled over a van for a minor traffic infraction. The driver and passenger in the front of the van immediately fled. The police looked in the van. They found 11 illegal immigrants, and they contacted Immigration and Customs Enforcement. They're still searching for the driver and the passenger, who are described as Hispanic here. Okay, now, when I was in college, colleges were basically places where you went to explore new ideas and figure out, we're going to be basically running the world when our parents' generation passes away. How are we going to do it? Can we do better than they did? And universities today are now becoming the most rigid enforcers of dogma. So over at the University of Michigan, they set up what they call a bias response team. And even the Department of Justice said this is bordering on censorship, but they got a judge to okay this. And under this bias response program, a student who voices a controversial or unpopular opinion, or who seeks to use humor, parody, or satire when discussing sensitive topics could face severe punishment. That's suppression of freedom of speech. The free speech zones didn't work on out, so now they're... Who decides whether an idea is popular or not? The whole idea of free speech is that you get out there with an idea that may be unpopular. This idea that the majority is always right is absolutely flat out wrong, because before the majority can be right, one person has to be right. And while that one person is right, the majority is in the wrong. And that's one of the reasons why you have to have open debate and dialogue. If this bias response team, had been around when, Galileo was using his telescope, the Catholic Church wouldn't have had to bother torturing him. Oh, it's controversial to say that the sun is the center of the solar system and the earth is moving. It's an unpopular thing. You will be penalized. Sit in the corner for an hour and don't think about polar bears. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Jim in New York, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, hi, Mike. I love your program. The one fear I have is, you see all these marches, the March for Immigrant Rights, the March for Our Lives. I think that's being used to divert the left from the wars. And at the same time, on the right, you have these false flag gun shootings. I think they're to divert the attention of the right, because it gets the right spending all their energy fighting gun rights, and the left, immigrant rights, all these fake, to me, fake issues. But the war, notice no one's talking about the wars.
Yes.
The left, they protest everything but the wars.
Yeah.
Nobody
wants to talk about, the corporate media just isn't reporting on them anymore. The wars are going very, very, very badly. They're not talking about Yemen, and since we're losing in Syria, they're not even talking about that anymore. Gone are the days where every other day the corporate media would be screaming that Assad was gassing his own people. We lost that one.
Yeah, but I hope so, because we never belong there. And my one big fear is, and I pray this doesn't happen, is a false flag blamed on Iran. And watch, if Trump were to bomb Iran, watch how the media makes nice with Trump all of a sudden. Remember 2001? We're all united. So I pray that we don't become united, because if we're united, God forbid, it's going to be a war. And that's my fear, and I fear that coming this fall, a false flag blamed on Iran. And Trump, on the surface, he's done a pretty good job, but bombed Syria twice, and he could have just said, oh, well, we need to investigate this matter, but he didn't. He bombed them. So that's my fear, false flag blame. And you know what?
I agree. I agree. They're going to have to do something to galvanize American support for yet another war, because most Americans, we're weary. We've been at this for 17, going on 18 years. We've had enough. And like I said earlier in the program, I'm very concerned about this Iranian naval exercise near the Straits of Hormuz, where there are going to be U.S. ships in the region as well, keeping an eye. And they could blow up some old used, warship, U.S. warship, and blame Iran for it.
And another thought I had was the powers that be, if you will, they let Trump win. And here's why. Middle America, pickup truck loving, gun loving America, they wouldn't fight for Hillary. But middle America would fight for Trump. So that's
okay, well, I need to back you up here a little bit, Jim, because when you say the powers that be, you've fallen for the idea that there is some kind of monolithic, unified control of the country, and there is not. There are various factions struggling for control, struggling for wealth, struggling for power, and they are at war with each other. And I think the powers that be, the deep state, did want Hillary Clinton to win, because Hillary would have protected all the nefarious things they've been doing. Look how they've been panicking ever since Trump won with all this Russian nonsense.
That's true.
And the Democrats are going to try and steal Congress this November, so they can shut down all the investigations and then they can sleep well at night.
Yeah, you have a good point. But anyway, you're my favorite show. I tell everyone I know about, listen to what really happened. Unfortunately, most of them don't. They're too lazy to watching the ball game or the movies. So.
Now, you may ignore politics, but politics will not ignore you. Jim, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. We're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates rejoining the network. And we're going to take a phone call from Kevin in West Virginia. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mr. Mike. What's on my mind is I see all these rallies and everything, and I'm afraid something like Charlottesville is going to happen again. I don't know how much more people on the right, and I hate to use left and right because I don't think there's such a thing called left and right. I mean, I think they're just, using that to play us off against one another. But anyway, I'm afraid of a Charlottesville type event going to happen here soon. How much more on people, I guess you could call it the right, how much more are they willing to take, like with Antifa and everything, that it's going to take for somebody to uncork on them?
Well, again, as long as they're seeing it on TV, it's safely remote. But when it starts happening in the streets of their own, their hometown, we might see a reaction. I'd like to avoid it. I still would like to find a way to just let the federal government peacefully expire the way the Soviet Union did and not have blood in the streets of America. Unfortunately, we already have blood in the streets of America thanks to Antifa and the liberal snowflakes and people like Maxine Waters who are just egging them on.
Sure. I mean, and with Maxine Waters and all these people that are, go out, riot, resist, when are they going to be held liable for their actions? I mean, they're the ones that are inciting all this. As far as I'm concerned,
incitement is a crime. Incitement is a crime. Maxine Waters should be wearing handcuffs.
Yeah. And I got another two more ones for you. There's one. I know a young lady who she was arrested by the police for destroying her cell phone, and I was like looking at her. I'm like, you get arrested for that, but Hillary Clinton doesn't get arrested for destroying her servers and all the Blackberries that she destroyed? Like, come on. Why is this double standard here? I don't understand it. And the other one is an overseas thing, and I don't suspect anybody would know about this. My family hosted a in Germany, and she was traveling the world over there, and she was in Budapest, and she was hit by a train and was killed. 19 years old, and I don't know if somebody pushed her on the track or, she was trying to catch the train and wrong time, wrong place. I'm kind of curious if anybody overseas there would have any information on something like that.
Boy, that would be a real long shot there. Anyway, your connection to us is starting to break up. We're going to let you go. Thank you for the phone call. And all right. This next story, I promise you, this is not from The Onion. In fact, this was in the Daily Mail, which is a couple of notches above The Onion. But apparently a nursery school has had its Ofsted rating downgraded after staff were accused of failing to monitor which of their 4-year-old pupils could be radicalized by ISIS. And one parent said the ruling was ludicrous, which it is. But the nursery in Hangleton Community Center near Brighton fears it can't be overturned. And unless there's a last-minute U-turn, the nursery school, which is called Little Ducklings, will be marked down. I mean, that's ridiculous. That is really ridiculous. 4-year-olds being radicalized by ISIS. Oh, man. You see ISIS in every corner. ISIS is in the closet. ISIS is under the bed. Okay, now we have, over the past years, talked about stories where kids will set up a lemonade stand or something of that ilk, and the city comes in and just shuts them down. by golly, you've got to have a permit. Didn't need a permit when I was a kid. Me and all my cousins, we all did lemonade stands, get a little extra spending money. Today, you must have a permit. Well, over in Minneapolis, the story had a slightly different outcome because there was this teenager who set up a hot dog stand, Mr. Faulkner's Old-Fashioned Hot Dogs. And, of course, somebody complained to the city that he was operating without the required certificates and permits. And some people over at the Minneapolis Department of Health decided they were going to step on in. And they said, we're not going to shut him down. We're going to help him get the permit. We're going to help him become a legal business owner. So the health inspectors trained him. And when he was trained on up to the health code, they handed him a permit. And he's reopened his stand. Now that is how government should be working, rather than this punitive approach of, you can't do that, not without our permission. Shouldn't it be government's job to assist people to make their lives better? Would make sense to me. Okay, now then, a couple more stories. Mandalay Bay will not go away. And apparently, a Las Vegas Metro police officer who was on duty the night of the 1st of October told a venue security guard after the attack that a security officer had been shot and killed inside the Mandalay Bay, and there was another shooting up the Strip. And in this video footage from the body cams, the officer can be heard saying, but now he, meaning the shooter, killed a security officer in the hallway on the 32nd floor of the Mandalay Bay. And I think the last we heard, there's another shooting at New York, New York. So he's still mobile, I guess, which again suggests there was more than one shooter. Now, there was a police officer who was actually inside the concert venue, was pinned down behind a wall on the west side of the Route 91 Harvest Music Festival. And basically, he said the gunfire was so close, he could smell gunpowder in the air. Now, police trained with firearms, they're going to know what the smell of gunpowder is. There's no way the smell of gunpowder was going to get all the way from up there at the top of the Mandalay Bay down to that Harvest Music Festival. So let's talk about computers and software and other things that, okay. Now, Amnesty International says that one of their staff was the target of an effort to spy on them with sophisticated Israeli-made malware that turns a person's mobile phone into a powerful surveillance device. And apparently, back in June, a staffer at the human rights group received a WhatsApp message purporting to be about a protest in support of political prisoners held by Saudi Arabia. Now, according to Amnesty International's analysis, the message contained a link to a fake news website that, if clicked, would have installed sophisticated malware. Now, the malware is called Pegasus. It's made by the Israeli cyber warfare company NSO Group. It's only sold to governments. Reddit's had another hack, and it's refusing to disclose the scale. Reddit apparently discovered back in June hackers compromised several employees' accounts to gain access to databases and logs. They were able to obtain usernames and corresponding email addresses, information that could make it possible to link activity on the site to real identities. Now, the Pentagon has a new program. They're calling it JEDI, if you can believe that. And it stands for the Joint Enterprise Defense Infrastructure. I wonder if there's an officer somewhere in the Pentagon that is told, come up with these cute names for us. You know, we're JEDI now. Anyway, they're teaming with Amazon, and they're basically overhauling the way the Pentagon shares military data. And contractors are already bidding on this, ranging from Microsoft to IBM. But apparently Amazon is the only company that meets the Defense Department's regulations on handling classified information. which comes as a surprise to me. I wouldn't know why Amazon was handling classified information. Kim.com confirms he's building a replacement for Twitter that will protect free speech, and as soon as it's up and running, I'm going to be over there. I'm definitely going to be on that. So should you be. Another article here about conservatives being banned from social media. What can you do about it? Well, part of the problem is the legal protections afforded under corporate personhood. When a company like Facebook is sued or prosecuted for its trespasses and criminality, the company itself is treated as if it's a legal person. And Mark Zuckerberg and his executives are not punished other than a drop in their stock portfolio. The company is punished, and this usually ends in fines which amount basically to pocket change. There need to be basically stronger laws saying that you will handle all traffic equally. And Devin Nunes is actually looking at that right now. Well, as you know, Google's new censorable Chinese search engine, Dragonfly, has basically been leaked out. And it's already provoking a backlash, saying that it proves Google is open to the idea of censorship if the government asks for it. And this article that came out from Zero Hedge is saying these U.S. tech giants, they really are too big and they're too powerful. They're monopolistic. And maybe it's time to break them up or have some kind of a common carrier situation. But what we've got right now are these, liberal CEOs using those platforms to push the liberal agenda. And that's not what users go there to have happen. Okay. All right. The TSA, the second most hated government agency, is actually considering eliminating checkpoints at 150 smaller U.S. airports. I assume none of these are international, just local flights. When we come on back, another story about TSA you are not going to believe. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. So we're talking about the TSA, or as we like to call them out here in Hawaii, the Tourism Suppression Agency. In a 2-to-1 vote, the Third U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in Philadelphia has declared that TSA screeners are shielded by government sovereign immunity from liability under the Federal Tort Claims Act because they do not function as investigative or law enforcement officers. The short version is TSA screeners are now immune from sexual assault charges. Let me repeat that. TSA screeners are now immune from sexual assault charges, or for that matter, civil litigation. So along with arrogance and bad manners and sneering insults and a generally hostile attitude, where the flying public is now going to have to put up with deviant TSA agents getting off on groping their crotches. And I can imagine there's already a lot of perverts heading on over to that TSA website to say, sign me up, sign me up. I only do children. I do the children. The TSA is supposed to keep us safe and test after test. It's clear they don't do that. Every time Department of Homeland Security is running a test on TSA, they fail miserably. And now the traveling public is wide open to continued abuse by agents and screeners without any recourse or redress. I think it's time to privatize airport security. At least you could sue them. But it's a ridiculous to say that, if a TSA screener is inappropriately touching you, if they've already established there's no bomb or anything there, and they keep on fondling you, that crosses the line into sexual assault. Okay, let's take a phone call. Mateus in Canada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Sign me up. I do the children. I only do the children. You're cracking me up there. Notice the wording was that the government's sovereign immunity. I don't think the government has sovereignty. I think a crown, a king, has sovereignty, but a representative democratic republic, constitutional republic, it's not sovereign in the way that they're trying to say it is, because there's no protection of the government from the will of the people in this kind of a government.
I'm sorry to disappoint you. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but unfortunately, the courts have basically said the government is a sovereign, a multi-headed one, and that people who work in the government cannot be sued for mistakes they make in the course of their job. And it's been a real issue. It's one of the reasons government is so out of control and so reckless that nothing bad happens to them.
Well, yeah, just because they say it doesn't mean that it's correct or okay. They're doing a lot of things that they're not supposed to be doing. Do you think constitutionally the Founding Fathers considered that the government could be protected from its own people?
No, it's not in the
claims
Constitution.
of sovereignty?
It's not in the Constitution. I think it goes back to a Supreme Court decision.
Yeah, they're claiming sovereignty, immunity from the people, but the people are the government, we the people. Anyway, okay, moving on. Regarding the approximate 42 GOP seats that are open, and this is a record since approximately like 1939 type of time period. And this kind of fits into my theory I called in a while ago that they don't want to have a one party take over everything, because then the whole world can see it's just a red communist Soviet Union or a red communist China or something like that. So I think that, you know, the Hillary was defeated so badly that there had to be some conspiracies to create these 42 open seats, just to allow the Democrats to come back, so that there can still be this game that it's actually a republic and that we're actually voting for everything. Do you know why there's so many 42 seats open, and would that possibly fit my theory that this is kind of contrived to give it back to the Democrats a bit?
Well, I don't think the GOP wants to give it back to the Democrats. And again, like our earlier caller, you're imagining that there is some kind of a unified, monolithic power in control of the country. The reality is there are these powerful factions who are at war with each other. I don't know why there are so many vacancies. Some are people are just plain retiring. Who knows? Maybe some of them were simply warned not to run again in order to empty those seats.
Well, the military, we agree to disagree a bit on that one. I'm always a bit more of a conspiracy theorist than you. I'd still argue my point a little bit that the industrial military complex and the deep state, they're getting their $1 trillion budgets regardless of who's in power, generally speaking. And
Yes.
so they would have a vested interest to keep this game going and make sure that we're still fooled that it's a democracy and that we're really picking our leaders. But anyways,
well, technically, it's supposed to be a republic. Okay? All right. Well, listen, thank you for the phone call. We got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Now, amazingly enough, you know, when you look at these gay and feminist lobbying groups, you tend to assume that they are funded by donations from philanthropists or benefactors. But it turns out the European Union has for years funded a small number of these lobby groups promoting a controversial and radical social agenda. And the groups include ILGA Europe and the European Women's Lobby. Now, the former is the umbrella organization for gay and lesbian pressure groups throughout Europe. And the latter is a group that, whilst pretending to speak on behalf of women, is actually follows a radical feminist ideology that does not have much support in the wider population. So why is the EU putting their money into this? I don't think it's what the people of the European Union think, should their taxes should be used for here. Over in Georgia, there was a father, Tay Lovelace. He and his family were at a church event to feed the homeless, and apparently a man wearing only his underwear approached them. The man then pulled down his underwear and basically exposed himself to the children. And Tay Lovelace pulled out a legally owned firearm and held the naked man there, 21-year-old Justin Mueller, until the police could show up. So that's a good use of a gun here. Here's a story that came on out of Reason.com. The hysteria over 3D printed guns is a great example of technophobia in media and politics. Something new comes along, they don't really understand it, and all they can do is hype, this is a danger, this is a threat, this cannot be allowed. And again, there are no exemptions in the Second Amendment. Now, I got to be very honest. I personally would never use one of these because I'd be afraid of making a mistake and having the thing blow up in my hands, although I understand that the Liberator doesn't. But obviously a plastic gun is not going to be good for very many shots. I can understand the police concern that criminals could make these as disposable Saturday night specials. There is one thing you do need to pay attention to, and that is how big that Liberator pistol is. It can't be concealed. It's a big, big thing. You have it in your jacket, it's going to have a huge, bump there, and everybody walking past you is going to say, what have you got, a colostomy bag or something? Because it is plastic, it has to be much thicker than steel. And again, I think our country has gone down the wrong path of, instead of punishing behaviors, we punish the owners of objects, especially in the area of civil forfeiture. And that's not what law enforcement is supposed to be. But it's easier to basically punish the law-abiding citizen for having things than to actually go out and hunt down the criminals. And what amazes me so much in this country, with all the surveillance that we now have, with all the surveillance out there and all the promised wonders of high technology, crime is still rampant in this country. I mean, it's gone down a little bit, and despite the claims by the gun grabbers, homicides have actually gone down as well. But trying to ban all guns is not the solution, because as 3D printed guns makes it abundantly clear, the criminals will always have them. Now, there's been a temporary injunction issued against the website where these 3D printer plans was stored, but the damage is done. They were downloaded before the website was ordered to cease. They're all over the web somewhere. And I'm sure right now that criminal organizations are hunting them down to be able to make guns. The only way that you stop a bad person with a gun is have a good person with a gun. And that's why I'm a fervent believer of the Second Amendment. We know there are bad people out there. We know there are crazy people out there. We know there are people out there with their brains melted on prescription psychiatric medication. The only way that we can mitigate the damage those people are capable of doing is for us to be able to shoot back. Okay? That's where I'm coming from on that one. Here's another one coming from London and shows just how over the top the government has become. And apparently there is this guy who works as a roofer, Stuart Gosling. He's 43 years old, and he has a van that he uses to carry materials around to do his job. And in his van, he has a trash bag in which he puts, wrappers from his crisps, which is what they call chips, sandwich wrappers, water bottles, because he eats on the job. But he got pulled over by council workers, and he basically told he was breaking the law because he didn't have permission to haul rubbish. He didn't have the license to carry rubbish. And he's tried to appeal the fine, but he's been told he's going to be hauled into court if he doesn't pay the penalty. So now in Britain, you need a license to carry your own trash. Well, there's a solution to that. Just pitch it out the window when nobody's looking. That'll make them all happy. But they want this guy to pay £229 to basically get a license to carry his own trash in his own van for 3 years. That is really, really over the top here. And you'd think they'd be worrying about other things. Apparently, there's a knife crime epidemic in Britain. Started in London, now it's spreading on out. It's straining the National Health Service. The victims are using up hospital beds and blood supplies. Paramedics are now forced to wear stab-proof vests. So, how's that refugee thing working out for you? What are they going to do now? Ban knives? It's silly here. Okay, out in California, as you know, they're having this horrible car fire, CARR, and the wildfires have burned more than 150,000 acres so far this year, and almost 100 large fires are currently burning across the country. And so, according to this article from ABC News, it's linked to climate change. Rising temperatures from climate change is what's making the fire seasons worse. No, that's not what's going on here. First of all, the reality is that 90% of wildfires are caused by people, either intentional or accidental, and we know that some of these fires currently burning were started by arsonists. The problem is rotting infrastructure and budget cuts. And if we go back and we look at the 2017 California fires, it turned out that the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection investigated and discovered that downed power lines had started those fires. Falling tree limbs, hitting power lines, ripped them down. And in one case, PG&E tried to re-energize an already down line that set off a fire. Why are tree limbs hitting those power lines? Because they're not cutting the trees back from the power lines. Why? Don't have the money to do that. So, I did a whole bunch of these flashback stories here. Actually, one of our readers did. Davis, California firefighters hit by budget cuts. California firefighters rue budget cuts as wildfire season heats up. CAL FIRE reduces fire budget by $34 million, cuts firefighters and DC-10 air tanker. They had this DC-10 water carrier, huge plane. And they basically canceled the exclusive use contract, which means if they have to call it in, it's going to cost that much more. They cut back 730 firefighters. So that's what's causing it. They're not cutting the brush. They're not clearing the fire breaks. They're cutting back on the fire departments. Why? Because California has to spend money on all those illegal immigrants so that they'll vote Democrat. Now, Michael Mann is back in the news. You probably remember he was a major figure during the ClimateGate scandal. Was investigated at one point over some inappropriate funding behavior, but apparently that went away. But he's back in the news, out there screaming, extreme heat could make 1/3 of the planet uninhabitable. Oh, it's coming. It's, be afraid, bow down to Al Gore. Up in Canada, the global warming tax has reached $1,000 per household. And that's really what it's all about. It's about the money. It's about the control. Now, we're seeing a lot of days where the sun does not have sunspots, which indicates it's in a minimum of activity. So I feel safe in prognosticating that we're going to have another early, hard winter this year. And when we point that out to the carbon Nazis, they're going to say, oh, that's just weather. That's just weather. Yeah. Well, climate is weather averaged out over time. And of course, right now, the carbon Nazis are running around trying to find record high temperatures they can throw at you, most of which they get from airport weather stations. where those temperature sensors are surrounded by planes belching out burning fuel. It's not really a measure of what's going on in the rest of the world. It's artificially high. Remember that one time in my ClimateGate article, there was a photograph of an official NOAA temperature sensing station right next to a trash incinerator. Gee, I wonder what kind of numbers they got off of that one. So, okay, now then, here on the Big Island, the volcano is still volcanoing. And because of the continuing collapse of the summit, they're starting to get very concerned that the collapse could widen. They were talking before about the possible damage or loss of Volcano House, loss and damage to the buildings of the Volcano National Park. And there's actually a fire station there. The Volcano Fire Station was located within the national park at the former Kilauea military camp. It's been temporarily relocated to a safer location. Now, it's actually been 2 days since we've had a major collapse event at the summit. But seismic activity is high, and a lot of people are concerned there may be a big one coming. But again, all we can do is just wait and watch and wait for it to end. And volcanologists were saying they thought it might be slowing. Now they're saying, no, that was just temporary. And again, the town of Volcano is working very hard to convince tourists to come back. Now, Volcano, of course, the big tourist attraction was the Volcano National Park, but they're basically working out places where you can go and see the volcano in safety, basically overlooking the lava flow. And there are boat and helicopter tours which are now maintaining a safe and respectable distance. So it is a disaster. And it's kind of weird because in times past when there have been eruptions, normally tourism would go up. But unfortunately, because of the way the corporate media portrayed this one, like it was this epic disaster that engulfed the whole state, a lot of people got scared, stayed away. I'd like to go down there myself here. Anyway, people are still talking about Sarah Sanders and Jim Acosta. They got into it at the press room. Jim Acosta apparently walked out of the room because Sanders refused to denounce the president's statement that the media is the enemy of the people. Well, that's not Sarah's job to denounce anything the president says. She's the president's spokesperson. But I'm in agreement with Trump on this one. The corporate media is the enemy of the people because it's forcing corporate agendas, Israel's agenda, the war machine agenda, liberal agenda. It's shoveling all of those at us as hard as they can. They're not interested in reporting on the news and the facts. They want to sensationalize things. They want to conductize us. They're trying to decide for us what we should think is important and what we should say isn't important, like Yemen and Gaza and Syria. They are the enemy of the people. Anyone who lies is an enemy of the people. So I agree with Trump about this one, and my applause to Sarah for standing firm on this. And maybe she should say that every one of these press conferences to get these reporters to just stroll on out there. Okay. There's been a new lawsuit filed, and it's trying to deal with overcharging by electronic monitoring companies. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, these are the companies where if you're released from jail, they may put a monitoring bracelet on your ankle so they know where you are going. Unfortunately, you have to pay for it. So this all began with Robert Jackson, who had a 120-day sentence in an Alameda County jail. His wife passed away unexpectedly, leaving their 3 young children without a parent in the home. He was compassionately released, but he had to have electronic monitoring by the for-profit Leaders in Community Alternatives Company. Now, this guy's weekly paycheck was between $400 and $500. His weekly monitoring fees to LCA came to $250 per week roughly half of his total income. After 113 days of monitoring, which was required for him to complete his sentence while taking care of his children, he ultimately paid $4,500 for the monitoring, while being repeatedly threatened with violation and jail if he didn't pay. So he's basically at the mercy of this company. And ultimately, he was forced to sell his car, and he's lost his apartment. He is now homeless just so he could pay off the leaders of community alternatives. And he's filed a lawsuit. And I do think that is predatory lending, quite predatory lending. It's taking advantage of people when they're at their weakest. We're going to take a break for commercials, back with the last segment of our show after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And as if we didn't have enough to worry about here in Hawaii between the floods out in Kauai and the volcano down on the Big Island, now we're looking at Hurricane Hector. This one just popped up over the last 2 days, and it organized, and it's already reached hurricane force, if you will. Let's see, maximum sustained winds 110 miles per hour, and not too surprisingly, there is a concern that it could come close to Hawaii. So we're going to keep an eye on that. And it's kind of interesting, for all the heavy weather that Hawaii has, we haven't really experienced a lot of it since we moved here, all those years ago. And I keep trying to describe to Claire just how bad it can get, because I was on Kauai when Iniki hit. There was another big storm that hit when I was on Kauai getting married the first time. They can be really, really nasty. So we're going to be keeping an eye on this one. And right now, the predicted course track is in fact turning toward the Hawaiian Islands, which doesn't really mean anything because the far end of that course track can really shift around. Now, not wanting anybody to suffer any kind of harm, I would be curious to see what happens if that hurricane's eye were to go right over the area of the erupting volcano, because I noticed this once before, when there was a hurricane that was coming on in, was going to, devastate the entire island chain, blah, 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 blah. And it crossed over the southern edge of the Big Island, right over the volcanic field, where even when it's not erupting, there's a lot of heat coming off of there. And it looked like it just tore that storm apart. And now, of course, there's a lot more heat coming out of there. So the academic in me is saying, should that happen, I'm going to be watching that. Because I don't think that's taken into consideration in those computer models. And I don't have a lot of confidence in the computer models. I mean, I've got the Weather Channel app. It's good for maybe the next 24 hours, and that's about it. Anything beyond that, they're just showboating. And our weather should be fairly simple here. We've got nothing but ocean around us. It's a perfect sphere. We don't have a lot of mountains and stuff out there disrupting airflow. We've got, clouds of these ocean monitoring buoys all around the state that monitor wind direction, temperature, also tsunamis. But we are going to be keeping an eye on that one. Meanwhile, over in the South China Sea, China is continuing to issue radio warnings to the armed forces of the Philippines operating near those islands to basically get away. And they're saying effectively, leave immediately or you will pay. So the rhetoric is ramping up over there. The radio transmissions appear to be coming directly from China's artificial islands. And they've got jamming technology, surface-to-air missiles, anti-ship ballistic missiles. They even have heavy bombers stationed there. And there's the music, and time for me to get out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. Stay tuned for John Stadmiller. I'm sure he's got a lot of interesting things to share with you. Please take what you learn here and share it with everyone that you know. We need word of mouth to basically be able to bypass the censorship coming from Facebook and Twitter and Google and the rest of it. We can't go through them. We have to go around them. Talk with people face to face, ask them to pass it on, bring back the sneaker net. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.